Admiral Jiwoo stared at the command screen, her hands gripping the edge of the control panel so hard her knuckles turned white. The signal from Kepler colony flickered once, twice, then died completely. She knew what that meant. The orbital bombardment had started. For 50 years, humanity had been the galaxy's peacekeepers. Their ships flew patrol routes in distant star systems, keeping order between alien races that couldn't agree on anything. Human captains were respected throughout the galaxy because they were fair, honest, and never took sides for personal gain. They had earned their place at the Galactic Council through blood, sweat, and decades of proving themselves worthy. Captain Minho's voice crackled through the emergency channel from New Geneva, one of humanity's newest colonies. His words were rushed, panicked. "Admiral, they're not hitting our defense stations. They're bombing the schools, the hospitals, the residential areas. They want to kill everyone, not just defeat us." Jiwoo closed her eyes for a moment. New Geneva had 3 million colonists, families who had left Earth hoping for a better life among the stars, children who had never seen their home planet. All of them were now under attack from the very aliens humanity had protected for decades. The betrayal had come without warning. Ambassador Thex of the hegemony had appeared on every human communication channel simultaneously. His 4 eyes gleamed with cold satisfaction as he delivered the Council's ultimatum. His voice was calm, almost bored, as if he was reading a grocery list instead of announcing genocide. "Humans of Earth and its colonies," he had said, "your recent mining operations have uncovered quantum crystal deposits of unprecedented value. These resources are too important to remain under the control of a single species. The Galactic Council has voted. You will immediately surrender all colonial territories to Council administration. Your people will be relocated to designated zones where they can be properly supervised." The word supervised made Jiwoo's stomach turn. She had seen what Council supervision looked like. The Vorthan people had been supervised into extinction within a generation. Thex continued his announcement with the same emotionless tone. "Any resistance will be met with complete elimination. You have 6 standard hours to begin evacuation procedures. This is not a negotiation." That had been 8 hours ago. The Council hadn't even waited for humanity's response. Jiwoo watched. The tactical display as red dots representing human colonies winked out one by one. Kepler colony gone. New Geneva under attack. Vista Prime. Communications dead. The pattern was clear. The aliens weren't just taking the quantum crystals. They were making sure no humans would be left alive to remember who had found them. First, the worst part was how completely humanity had been caught off guard. Their fleet was scattered across 1,000 light-years, stationed at alien worlds to keep peace between species that had been fighting for centuries. Captain Hyunwoo was protecting a trade route near the Zephyr Nebula. Commander Sujin was mediating a border dispute in the Outer Rim. Lieutenant Jiho was escorting refugee ships to safety in the core worlds. All of them were racing back to human space now, but they would arrive too late. The attacks were coordinated, perfectly timed for when humanity's defenders were as far from home as possible. "Admiral," came another voice through the comm system. It was Captain Doyon from the exploration vessel Horizon. "We just received word from the mining station at Cygnus 7. The Titanid clans are moving in with heavy cruisers. The miners are requesting immediate evacuation." Jiwoo wanted to scream. The Titanid clans had been humanity's closest allies for 20 years. Human medical teams had saved their colonies from a plague that nearly wiped out their species. Human engineers had helped them build their first faster-than-light ships. Now they were bombing human civilians without hesitation. "How many Council species are participating in the attacks?" she asked. "All of them, Admiral. Every single member race has committed ships to this operation. Even the ones we saved from extinction are attacking our colonies." The command bridge fell silent. 50 years of friendship, cooperation, and sacrifice had meant nothing. The moment something valuable was discovered in human territory, every alien species in the galaxy had turned against them like a pack of hungry wolves. Jiwoo looked at the star map showing human space. Dozens of colonies that had taken generations to build were being erased from existence. Millions of people who had trusted the galaxy to be fair were learning the hardest lesson of all, that kindness was often seen as weakness by those who had never learned to be kind themselves. But something else was growing in Jiwoo's chest alongside the grief and horror. It was cold, patient, and absolutely determined. The aliens had made a terrible mistake. They thought humanity was weak because humans chose peace over war. They thought humans were defenseless because they had spread their fleet thin to help others. They were about to learn the difference between choosing not to fight and being unable to fight. The news of the colony attacks spread across Earth like wildfire. Within hours, something unprecedented happened. Political parties that had fought each other for decades suddenly stood together. Corporate rivals shared resources without question. Nations that hadn't spoken in years opened their communication channels and began coordinating their response. Admiral Jiwoo found herself in the Situation Room beneath Geneva, surrounded by faces she recognized from news broadcasts and history books. The President of the Americas sat next to the Premier of the Asian Federation. The Director of the African Union was video conferencing with the European Chancellor. For the first time in human history, every major power on Earth was working toward the same goal. "How many ships do we have?" asked the President, his voice heavy with the weight of what they were facing. "Not enough," Jiwoo replied honestly. "We have 43 capital ships scattered across known space, trying to get back to Earth. Most of our destroyer squadrons are 3 weeks out. The Council hit us when our fleet was spread thinnest." The room fell quiet. Everyone understood what that meant. Earth's orbital defense platforms were formidable, but they weren't designed to fight the combined might of every alien species in the galaxy. But then something remarkable happened. The lunar governor stepped forward with numbers that made everyone's eyes widen. "Our shipyards have been running at 30% capacity for the last decade. We can push them to 200% if we ignore safety regulations and work around the clock. We can have new ships rolling off the production lines within 2 weeks. The Martian Industrial Coordinator nodded eagerly. "Our manufacturing plants have been producing mining equipment and terraforming tools. We can retool them for military. Production in 72 hours. We have the raw materials stockpiled from the asteroid belt operations." Jiwoo watched as humanity's leaders transformed from politicians into generals. The same competitive spirit that had driven humans to spread across the solar system was now focused on a single purpose. Every space station, every mining facility, every research outpost was being converted into part of Earth's war machine. Dr. Hana entered the room, carrying a stack of data tablets that would change everything. She was a small woman with graying hair who had spent her entire career studying alien biology. For 50 years, she had worked alongside the galaxy's greatest xenobiologists, learning everything there was to know about how different species lived, breathed, and survived. "I need to show you something," she said, connecting her tablet to the main display. "These are the biological profiles of every council species: respiratory systems, cardiovascular patterns, nervous system structures, immune responses. I've been collecting this data for decades." The display filled with detailed anatomical charts, the hegemony's 4-chambered hearts that couldn't handle rapid pressure changes, the Zephyrian respiratory system that relied on specific atmospheric mixtures, the Krek's neural pathways that were vulnerable to certain electromagnetic frequencies. "I gathered all this information because I believed in cooperation," Dr. Hana continued, her voice growing harder. "I wanted to understand our allies so we could work together better. I wanted to make sure human medical teams could help them if they were ever injured. I documented their weaknesses so we could protect them." She paused, looking around the room at the faces staring back at her. "I never imagined I would be using this information to fight them." The irony was crushing. Humanity's greatest asset. In this war was their kindness. Every piece of data that would now be used to defeat the Council had been gathered with the best intentions. Human doctors who had saved alien lives had unknowingly provided the intelligence that would win humanity's survival. On Mars, Captain Taiho was already putting Dr. Hana's research to work. The Red Planet's industrial complexes had been transformed. Overnight, factories that once produced atmospheric processors were now churning out specialized weapons systems. Each one was designed to exploit specific biological vulnerabilities that humans had learned about through friendship and cooperation. The sonic disruptors tuned to frequencies that would scramble Krek's brain functions, atmospheric bombs filled with compounds that would be harmless to humans but toxic to Zephyrian respiratory systems, electromagnetic pulse weapons calibrated to disrupt hegemony neural implants. "It feels wrong," Tejo confided to his production supervisor. "We're using their trust against them." "They used our trust against us first," came the reply. "They waited until our ships were scattered helping their people before they attacked our children." Meanwhile, at the edge of the solar system, Council fleets were gathering in numbers that had never been seen before. Thousands of alien warships from dozens of species, all united in their determination to claim Earth's quantum crystals. Their commanders were confident. Humans were known throughout the galaxy as peaceful mediators, not fierce warriors. The alien fleet admirals held strategy meetings where they debated how quickly the humans would surrender. Some believed it would take only a show of force. Others thought a few targeted strikes would be necessary. None of them considered the possibility that humanity might actually fight back effectively. They had made a fundamental error in judgment. They assumed that because humans chose peace, they were incapable of war. They thought that because humanity preferred cooperation, they were weak. The aliens had spent so many centuries fighting each other that they couldn't imagine a species that was strong enough to choose restraint. But humans hadn't forgotten how to fight. They had simply chosen not to, as long as there were better options available. Every human child learned about the wars that had shaped their species. The tactical brilliance that had won impossible victories. The stubborn determination that had turned defeats into comebacks. The innovative thinking that had overcome superior numbers and technology time and time again. Now, with no better options left, humanity was about to remember who they really were. The attack began in silence. Deep within the asteroid belt, hidden, bases that the Council had never suspected suddenly came alive. These weren't the grand shipyards of Luna or Mars, but secret facilities carved into floating rocks, disguised as mining operations and research stations. For years, they had been quietly building something the galaxy had never seen before. Captain Mina checked her instruments one final time as her stealth frigate drifted away from the asteroid that had hidden it for months. Around her, dozens of similar ships were emerging from concealment, their hulls shifting color like chameleons. The adaptive camouflage technology was based on research from Earth's ocean creatures, cuttlefish that could change their appearance in milliseconds to blend with any background. "Remember," Mina spoke into her comm unit, addressing the other ship captains, "we're not here to fight fair, we're here to win. The Council wants to play by their rules, but they forgot something important. Humans wrote the book on guerrilla warfare. The Vengeance fleet wasn't built for glorious ship-to-ship combat. These vessels were designed for something far more dangerous, surgical strikes that would cripple the enemy before they even knew they were under attack." Every ship was fast, nearly invisible, and equipped with weapons that exploited the biological weaknesses Dr. Hana had documented. Captain Jinho, piloting a ship called the Silent Hunter, was the first to engage. His target was a hegemony supply, convoy carrying fuel cells to the main Council fleet. The alien ships never saw him coming. One moment they were cruising peacefully through space, and the next their cargo holds were erupting in carefully controlled explosions that left the EE ships crippled but didn't kill the crews. "Supply convoy neutralized," Jinho reported. "Their fuel is gone, but I left their life support intact. They can send a distress signal." This was psychological warfare at its finest. The humans could have easily destroyed the ships and killed everyone aboard, but they chose not to. The message was clear. "We could have murdered you, but we decided to show mercy." How does that make you feel about your own actions? Meanwhile, Captain Somin was approaching a different kind of target. The Krek's Empress, a massive dreadnought that was supposedly unsinkable, was patrolling the outer system with arrogant confidence. The ship was a marvel of alien engineering, with armor thick enough to withstand direct hits from nuclear weapons and shields that could deflect energy beams. But Somin wasn't planning to attack the armor or the shields. She was going after something far more vulnerable. The crew inside. The nanobots she released were invisible to the Krek sensors. They were designed to mimic harmless space dust, drifting slowly toward the enemy ship until they made contact with the hull. Once there, they began their real work. These microscopic machines had been programmed with detailed knowledge of Krek's biology, particularly their immune systems. Inside the dreadnought, the Krek's crew began experiencing something they had never felt before. Their own bodies were turning against them. The nanobots had convinced their immune systems that their own organs were foreign invaders. The mighty warriors who had conquered dozens of worlds were brought low by an enemy too small to see. The Krek's Empress sent out a panicked distress call before going dark. The crew wasn't dead, but they were completely incapacitated. Another psychological victory. The humans had defeated the invincible ship without firing a single conventional weapon. But perhaps the most impressive display came when the Voth warpods tried to engage human fighters in direct combat. The Voth were known throughout the galaxy as the most aggressive pilots alive. Their ships were built like missiles, designed to ram into enemy vessels at incredible speeds. They had never met a foe they couldn't outmaneuver. They had never fought pilots trained in Earth's storms. Lieutenant Chang Min had learned to fly in the hurricane-force winds of Earth's Pacific Ocean. He had navigated through tornadoes, flown through blizzards, and mastered aerobatics in conditions that would terrify most alien pilots. To him, the predictable movements of the Voth warpods seemed almost slow. "They fly like they're underwater," he commented to his wingman as he spiraled around a Voth attack, making the alien pilot dizzy with confusion. No creativity, no adaptation. They just point and charge. One by one, the warpods found themselves outmaneuvered by human fighters that moved like nothing they had ever encountered. The humans didn't just dodge attacks. They used the Voth's own momentum against them, leading them into collisions with each other or steering them into asteroid fields where their speed became a liability. What terrified the Council forces most wasn't the advanced technology or the clever tactics. It was the realization that humans were learning from every encounter. Each battle made them more dangerous. They studied their enemies' mistakes, adapted their strategies, and shared their knowledge with other human units in real time. The hegemony commanders began to understand what they were truly facing. Humans weren't just another spacefaring species. They were the descendants of Earth's most successful predators, persistence hunters who had chased mammoths across continents until their prey collapsed from exhaustion. They were problem solvers who had survived ice ages, plagues, and wars that would have destroyed other species. Every human victory revealed something that the Council had missed during 50 years of peaceful cooperation. Behind the diplomatic smiles and fair negotiations was a species that had evolved to never give up, never stop learning, and never stop adapting to overcome any challenge. The aliens had made the mistake of judging humanity by their choice to be peaceful, not by their capacity to be dangerous. Now they were learning the difference between the two, one humiliating defeat at a time, and this was just the beginning. The cracks in the Council alliance began to show after just 3 weeks of human counterattacks. What had started as a united front against humanity was rapidly becoming a blame game among terrified alien species who suddenly realized they had awakened something far more dangerous than they had imagined. The first to break was the ethereal collective. Their entire civilization was built around a shared consciousness network that connected billions of minds across dozens of worlds. It was their greatest strength, allowing them to coordinate actions across vast distances with perfect unity. It was also their greatest weakness, and the humans had figured that out within days. Captain Dong-Yun was a computer programmer before the war started. He had spent years working with alien computer systems, learning their languages and protocols, so that human and alien technologies could work together smoothly. Now he was using that same knowledge to turn the ethereal network against itself. "It's beautiful in a way," he explained to his cyber warfare team as they prepared their attack. "Their minds are all connected, which means if we can introduce the right kind of confusion into their network, it spreads everywhere at once." The attack was elegant and devastating. Human hackers didn't try to destroy the ethereal network. Instead, they fed it contradictory information. False sensor readings that showed human fleets in 12 different locations simultaneously. Fake communications that made ethereal commanders think their allies were betraying them. phantom orders, that sent their ships chasing ghosts across empty space. Within hours, the entire ethereal collective was paralyzed by confusion. Their shared consciousness, which had once been their greatest asset, had become a weapon turned against them. Billions of minds were receiving conflicting information, and their attempts to sort truth from fiction only made the chaos worse. The ethereal Empress sent a desperate message to the Council headquarters. "We cannot continue this war. Our network is compromised. We are withdrawing all forces immediately." The Titan clans lasted slightly longer, but their defeat was even more humiliating. These were warriors who had conquered worlds by boarding enemy ships and fighting hand-to-hand in the corridors. Their bodies were adapted to survive in toxic environments that would kill most other species within minutes. They believed themselves to be the ultimate boarding fighters in the galaxy. They had never encountered humans who had trained in Earth's deepest ocean trenches. Lieutenant Kyung-ho led the first human boarding party onto a Titan clan destroyer. His team wore environmental suits that incorporated bacteria from Earth's most extreme environments, microorganisms that thrived in conditions that would destroy normal life. The toxic atmosphere that the Titans relied on for protection was no more dangerous to these humans than breathing underwater with scuba gear. But the real shock came when the fighting started. The Titans were expecting the kind of formal, organized combat they had experienced with other species. Instead, they found themselves facing humans who fought like they were still in Earth's ancient forests, using every trick that evolution had taught them. Kyung-ho's team moved through the ship's corridors like predators stalking prey. They used the ship's own systems against the defenders, cutting power to sections to create darkness, redirecting atmospheric systems to flush defenders out of hiding spots, and employing tactics that seemed to come from some primitive part of the human brain that still remembered hunting much larger and more dangerous creatures. The Titan warriors, for all their strength and toxin resistance, found themselves outmatched by humans who had grown up playing games that were essentially practice for exactly this kind of fighting. Video games, paintball, laser tag, capture the flag. Human children had been unconsciously training for ship-to-ship combat their entire lives. Within days, Titan boarding parties that had once terrorized the galaxy were being systematically defeated by human teams who treated the whole thing like an elaborate puzzle to be solved. The Titan war chief sent his own message to the Council. "These humans are not warriors as we understand them. They are something else entirely. We cannot defeat them in close combat." As the human fleet pushed deeper into Council space, more allies began abandoning the coalition. The Zephyrian Navy fled after human fighters demonstrated air superiority tactics that made their own pilots look like amateurs. The crystalline entities retreated when human scientists figured out how to disrupt their molecular structure using sound waves. Admiral Jiwoo's flagship, the Endurance, finally arrived at the Council's capital world to find complete chaos. The great alliance that had seemed so powerful just months before was now a collection of frightened species pointing fingers at each other and desperately trying to assign blame for their disasters. The Council chamber, once a symbol of galactic unity, had become a shouting match. Species that had been allies for centuries were accusing each other of cowardice, incompetence, and betrayal. The carefully constructed political balance that had held the galaxy together was crumbling under the pressure of humanity's relentless advance. When Admiral Jiwoo was finally allowed to address the Council, the terms she offered shocked everyone in the chamber. The aliens had expected demands for territory, resources, or tribute. They had prepared for negotiations about surrender terms and reparations. Instead, Jiwoo simply said, "We want what we've always wanted: fair treatment, equal representation, honest cooperation, the right to exist without fear of betrayal." The silence in the chamber was deafening. After months of devastating military defeats, humanity was offering the same thing they had been asking for before the war started. They didn't want to conquer the galaxy or enslave other species. They just wanted to be treated as equals, instead of convenient tools to be discarded when something better came along. But pride is a dangerous thing, especially when it's all that remains after a crushing defeat. Several council leaders couldn't accept the reality of their situation. The hegemony overlords, the Void Reapers, and the Stellar Dominion all rejected humanity's terms and retreated to their most heavily fortified worlds. "Let them come," declared Overlord Vex, broadcasting from his fortress world of Terminus Prime. "Our defenses have protected us for 10,000 years. No primitive species will break walls that have turned back entire armadas. They were about to learn that humans had a very different approach to breaking walls than anyone else in the galaxy. The siege of Hegemony Prime would be talked about in alien history books for centuries to come, not because of the violence or destruction, but because of how completely it shattered everything the galaxy thought it knew about warfare." Overlord Thex stood in his quantum-shielded command center, 10 miles beneath the planet's surface, watching the human fleet arrive. His fortress world had been designed by the greatest military minds in hegemony history. The surface was protected by energy shields that could deflect asteroid impacts. Underground bunkers stretched for thousands of miles, connected by tunnels, that could shelter the entire planetary population. Automated defense systems covered every possible approach with overlapping fields of fire. "Let them waste their ships against our shields," Thex declared to his generals. "Terminus Prime has never fallen, it never will." The human fleet took up positions around the planet and began what looked like a traditional siege. Admiral Jiwu's ships maintained a blockade, while engineering vessels started setting up equipment in orbit. To the hegemony observers, it appeared that humanity was preparing for a long, drawn-out bombardment that would eventually wear down their defenses through sheer persistence. They were completely wrong. Captain Seojun, leading the human engineering corps, wasn't planning to break through the hegemony's shields. He was planning to make them irrelevant. The equipment his teams were installing wasn't weapons. It was scientific instruments designed to study the planet's quantum field generators in exquisite detail. "Every shield has a frequency," Seojun explained to his team as they worked. "Every energy field has a pattern. The hegemony thinks their quantum technology is impossible to understand because it's based on principles that other species haven't discovered yet. But humans have something they don't. We're really, really good at figuring out how things work." For 3 weeks, the human fleet appeared to do nothing but sit in orbit and scan the planet. The hegemony leaders grew increasingly confident that the siege would fail. Their quantum shields were holding perfectly. Their underground cities were completely secure. The humans seemed to be running out of ideas. Then the earthquakes started. At first, they were small tremors that barely registered on seismic equipment, but they were happening in patterns that didn't match any natural geological activity. The hegemony's scientists noticed that the tremors were synchronized with pulses from the human ships in orbit, but they couldn't figure out what the humans were trying to accomplish. Lieutenant Cheong, a geology specialist who had studied Earth's most dangerous volcanic regions, was directing the operation from her position aboard the science vessel Discovery. She had spent years learning how earthquakes worked, how tectonic plates moved, and how to predict when mountains might collapse or valleys might shift. The hegemony built their fortress, assuming that attacks would come from above, she explained to Admiral Jiwoo during one of their planning sessions. But they forgot something important. Every planet has weak spots, fault lines, unstable rock formations, underground rivers. We're not trying to break their shields. We're going to change the ground underneath them. The human engineers were using quantum resonance technology, not to attack the shields directly, but to manipulate the planet's geological structure. They were creating controlled earthquakes that followed the natural fault lines, gradually shifting massive rock formations and redirecting underground water flows. After 6 weeks of careful geological manipulation, the impossible happened. The mountain range that housed the hegemony's primary shield generators began to sink into the planet's crust, not violently, not destructively, but slowly and inevitably, like a building settling into soft ground. The quantum shield generators, designed to be immovable and eternal, found themselves tilted at angles that disrupted their carefully calibrated energy fields. Gaps began to appear in the supposedly impenetrable defensive grid. But the real surprise came when the final assault began. Instead of attacking through the gaps in the shields, human forces emerged from places the hegemony had never thought to defend. the planet's own geological fault lines. Sergeant Minjay led the first team of tunnel fighters up through a fissure that hadn't existed a month earlier. These weren't traditional soldiers, but specialists who had trained in Earth's deepest cave systems, people who could navigate underground environments that would terrify most surface dwellers. They emerged into hegemony bunkers like ghosts appearing from solid rock. The psychological impact was devastating. The hegemony's most secure locations were suddenly filled with human soldiers who seemed to have materialized out of the planet itself. Their quantum locks and automated defenses were useless against enemies who had bypassed every layer of security by coming up through the floor. Within hours, the fortress that had stood unconquered for 10,000 years had fallen to an attack, method that its builders had never imagined possible. Ambassador Thex found himself standing in the same council chamber where he had announced humanity's destruction just months earlier. But instead of facing a conquered enemy, he was looking at Admiral Jiwoo, who had come not as a conqueror but as someone seeking justice. "You expected us to be angry," Jiwoo said, her voice calm and measured. "You thought we would want revenge for what you did to our colonies, but you were wrong about that, just like you were wrong about everything else." Thex stared at her, confused. In his experience, victory was always followed by brutality. Winners took everything they could from losers. That was how the galaxy had always worked. "We're not angry," Jiwoo continued. "We're disappointed. We trusted you. We helped you. We believed that cooperation was possible. You taught us that we were naive." The new Galactic Accords were signed in the ruins of the old council chamber. But instead of claiming territory or demanding tribute, humanity did something that shocked the entire galaxy. They asked for monitoring stations to be placed throughout former council space, not to control other species, but to make sure nothing like this betrayal could happen again. The treaty included provisions for fair trade, honest communication, and transparent government. Species that wanted to join the new galactic community had to prove they could be trusted with their neighbors' welfare. Those that preferred the old ways of conquest and betrayal were free to stay in their own territories, but they would find themselves isolated from the prosperity that cooperation could bring. The galaxy learned a lesson that would echo through history. Humans weren't dangerous because they were violent or aggressive. They were dangerous because they never stopped learning, never stopped adapting, and never forgot when someone betrayed their trust. The universe had become a more honest place, whether it wanted to or not,